Well, it's 12:30, so I think it's time for us to make a start on today's Unitemps webinar about writing cover letters. Thank you for being here and you're very welcome. My name's Jill Frigerio. I'm your chair today. My job here at the University of Warwick is to train career development professionals in how to help people with their careers, which includes, of course, CVs, which we talked about in a previous webinar, and cover letters and applications and so forth. And before doing this job, I was a careers advisor myself. And so that's why I've been invited by the Unitemps team to chair today. I'm here with my panelist guests, Amy and Keith, who I'll introduce shortly. So just to let you know what's going to happen, many of you submitted questions whilst you registered for this webinar, and we've used those to prepare some answers that we're going to go through with you, but we're also keen to answer questions that people today bring with them. So as I said a moment ago, if you were online early, there's a Q&A button at the top of your screen, and we'd invite you to use that to ask particular questions. And when we've gone through what we've already prepared, I will use that, what's in that Q&A section, to select questions and discuss those with Amy and Keith as well. So I think you've had some questions answered in the chat about the recording being available. Yes, you will get an email with the recording at some point after we've finished. So I'll just introduce my panelists today. So first of all, welcome to Amy. Amy's a careers consultant at the University of Salford, where she's got a strategic remit for career support for international students. But she works, of course, with a wide range of students on CVs and cover letters for everything from part-time work to graduate or researcher positions. So welcome, Amy. Would you like to say hello?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here today.
Great. And Keith Kilgore is a career consultant at Heriot-Watt University in Scotland. Keith works closely with students across engineering and science disciplines and with PhD research students as well. And like Amy, he supports students with their career planning, with sourcing opportunities and the whole application process at all stages of the student's journey. So welcome, Keith. Good to have you here.
Hi, good afternoon, and thanks very much for the invite. It's really nice to be around with everybody, so let's hope we'll have a nice afternoon.
Brilliant. And you can find out more, I'm sure, about our panelists from the webinar publicity. Well, thanks very much to those of you who submitted questions as you booked. And we're going to, as I said, we're going to go through some of those. And I think that a really good place to start, an excellent question that's been posed is, what's the point of a cover letter? I mean, we've got a modern approach to job applications now. Are cover letters still an effective tool, or are there alternative approaches gaining traction? I thought that was an excellent question. Amy, over to you on this one.
Thanks, Jill. Okay, so I would say that a recruiter doesn't get to meet you and chat to you to find out all of the information that they need. So they're typically going to receive 3 sides of A4 paper, 1 being your cover letter and up to 2 being your CV. And that's what they're using to assess whether they think that you can do that job, which, when you think about it like that, can be quite limiting. So if you only give them your CV, then you're missing out an extra opportunity to help tell your story. That CV has a brief overview with all of your experience, your skills, your knowledge, but in your cover letter, you can tell them more about you, why you're interested in the role and the organisation, and what you can bring to it, which you can't really easily do in that CV in all of those aspects. It's really important to write a cover letter for UK applications because it also gives you an additional opportunity to convince that employer why they should hire you if you haven't given enough of that already. Of course, it does need to be tailored to that particular job or organisation, and that's a really good way of ensuring that that employer does look at it closely, because you've really tailored it to them. You'll most likely be applying online for lots of jobs, so the modern approach to the element of that question would be maybe including the content of that cover letter in the body of your email, if that's how you're sending your CV and cover letter across. Or if it's an online application form or on an online portal, there might be a free text box, for example, where you can add the body of that cover letter. And by the body of that cover letter, I mean that when you see a lot of examples online, they've got your address, the employer's address, and then dear whoever. So you would just start with dear whoever that person would be.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Amy. So you've mentioned cover letters there in the context of CVs and cover letters. So I think what people would be interested to know more about is the link between that cover letter and the CV. How do you decide what scenarios, what experience to put in the CV and what to leave for the cover letter? So Keith, can I come to you on this one, please?
Yeah. Well, on the whole, recruiters are gonna read your cover letter before your CV. Yeah. So whether that's an email or whether you've posted it in the olden days where you've stuck it in the post, so they're going to read that cover letter first, and that then becomes the first opportunity for you to impress them, to show them that you've done your research, you've done your homework, and that you're the perfect fit for the role. So you need to make sure at that stage that you're letting your personality, your enthusiasm shine through, as well as your suitability for the job. So again, in the olden days, and in some countries still, the covering letter isn't actually called a covering letter. It's called a letter of motivation. And I think that word motivation gives us the psychology that we need for completing the letter. It gives us the steer of what to include. What's your motivation for wanting to work for the company? What's your motivation for the role? What might their motivation be for wanting to find out more about you and consider you for the role and eventually get you in for an interview? And in that letter of motivation, you can then point to aspects of your CV that you want the reader to look at. But it means then that you don't recount or you don't replay all the stuff that's in your letter. So what we don't want is a letter version of your CV. Here's my CV again in the style of a letter. Yeah. So what we have to do is distinguish the psychology between them. And I think the letter is very much about your motivation.
That's really helpful, Keith. Thank you. So basically, we've got this sort of panoply of ways of making winning applications to employers, whatever the circumstances. That's about that, some employers will have application forms, some will want a CV and a cover letter. Sometimes you're writing speculatively, or maybe you're using LinkedIn, but cover letters certainly have a place, don't they, as part of that range of approaches that we're using. So we got some questions in advance on the details of cover letters themselves. And Keith, sticking with you then, could you help us to understand what makes a good cover letter? And I think particularly people would like tips on size and formatting, length and the order and so forth of a cover letter.
Well, you give me an easy one then, to get on with
Yeah,
it.
yeah, no problem.
How to do it properly. Yeah. It's one of these things that I think I'm going to caveat what I'm going to say already right at the beginning, because I think there are a number of sections that we'll need to have within the covering letter. But as soon as we think about that in a kind of a structured way, sometimes it can get in the way of doing the covering letter in a way that makes sense for us. So I'll tell you what I'm going to tell you, and then I'll tell you a bit of a silly little story at the end, just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about. But what we need to do is try and keep that letter to a reasonable length. So one side of A4 is enough, a letter, yeah, whether 3-4 paragraphs. But let's stick to a modern professional business format. And that, in terms of style and whatever, that's the biggie. Does it matter if it's Times New Roman or Arial or Calibri? As long as it's not Comic Sans, then you're probably okay. But it has to form a package. Back to the original bit, the relationship between the letter and the CV, they have to look like a packaged document. Yeah. So we want a nice modern professional business document. But then when we're looking at this at the letter, it has to be tailored to a specific role. So what we need to do, let's think about 4 maybe different sections of the letter. First section should really introduce you. Yeah, we need to tell the reader why you're writing to them, what job you're applying for, where you saw it advertised, and what you're currently doing. You know, I'm a penultimate year undergraduate, you know, business student or engineer. So we need to know that you need to kind of set that up, but we also need to know why you're writing. You know, I'd like to apply for the position that was advertised in, or I'm now keen to develop my experience over the summer as an integral part of my degree, and I'd like to discuss with you the role that you offered. But we need to make sure that by the end of that section, the reader is in no doubt of why they're reading your letter. Yeah, so introduce yourself and ask for the job. But then we need to move on a little bit, and we need to talk then, given I'm going to go back to the motivation. Yeah, think about motivation as the psychology. Why do you want to work for these guys? Why do you want to work for the organization? Why this organization in particular? So show them that you know what they do, that you've done your research, and more importantly, it's not what you know about the company, but what attracts you about what you know about the company. Yeah, don't just tell them they're a great company, but focus on the aspects of the organization that impress you, and tell them why that they impress you. This is why your company is the one that I'm writing to. It might be innovation in the technology that you use. It might be a focus that they've got on customers and building customer relationships as a driver for their business, or they tackle sustainability in a way that you really like. Whatever it is, make sure you tell them that what they do matches the value sets and the ambitions that you've got. And you don't want to focus on too many, but 2 or 3 areas that really hit hard about why that company is exactly the one for you. And then we move on. We need to think then about the job itself. So not just the company, but the role. Let them know that you understand what's going to happen within the role. What does the role involve, and what value that job will have within the company, and an indication that you're clear about the importance of the role, and it's one of the main factors that motivated you to apply. So why am I interested in the job, and why am I interested in the company? So that word why will come back quite a lot. And finally, we've got a section on you. So what makes you so fabulous? Why are they going to be interested in you? So we need to summarize what you believe that you've got to offer them, the terms of strengths, knowledge, experience that you've got, to leave them in no doubt that you know that you could be of value to that organization. Then at the end, we can thank them for their time, reiterate that you're really enthusiastic and you'd be really pleased to discuss your application with them. But as soon as we do it like that, and this is the caveat that I've got, there can be flexibility in the order of that. We don't have to start necessarily with the organization. We could start with the role. But what we need to do, and in my head, I don't want you to write about the company without linking it to you. And I don't want you to write about you without linking it back to the company. So maybe it's just the way my Irish mind works. I have to dumb it all down a little bit. So apologies for anybody listening if this doesn't make sense, but I'm too old to remember this, but it's a little bit like going to chat someone up that you maybe meet in the pub or meet in a cafe or something. Yeah. And so you'll need to keep me right, because obviously I've forgotten how to do all of this kind of stuff. But if you go into somewhere and you see someone sitting in the pub, for instance, and you go, oh, I quite like you, I'm going to go and chat to you. What's the process? What do you do? Well, you would go up and you would introduce yourself. Yeah. But would you talk about yourself for the next 10 minutes? Well, no, of course you wouldn't, because you're just going to go weirdo and go to the toilet and climb out the window and leave. What you would do is you would introduce yourself, and then you would compliment them. You would show interest in what they're saying. You would ask all about them, and then you would look for common interests between you. And then you go, oh, is that your favorite movie? That's my favorite movie too. It's on at the weekend. What are you doing on Friday night? Kind of thing, if I remember right. And we want to kind of do in your letter something similar for the company. Show them that you know what they do. Show them what motivates you about the company. Show them that you've got a genuine interest, and they go, guess what? That's exactly the sort of thing that I'm interested in as well. And it fits really well with the sort of experience that I've got. Can you believe it? You do that. I'm interested in that. It's the same thing. It's like magic. And that's the sort of motivational element of the letter. So if that's not too silly, you can see the sort of way that I'm thinking. Although it's structured, we can actually be a little bit flexible in the way that feels.
Okay, well, and we'll come to you for the next webinar about online dating, Keith, and whether we can apply those same principles. That's just an aside, and I was joking. So, Amy, we've had a lot of requests in advance, and they're coming through now as well, for templates and sample sentences for cover letters. What are your thoughts about that?
Okay, so at the University of Salford, we avoid giving students and graduates templates. And we do that because we found that when we've done it previously, then we have lots of similar cover letters because everyone follows the same structure. So like Keith says, you know, there is movement in that. But I think if you're sometimes given a structure to follow, then everyone follows it exact, and then they all become a little bit too similar. So that's frustrating for an employer because they want to see your individuality, and the same applies for using AI. But let's get onto AI in a moment. We'll come back to that. As Keith says, we suggest the order that we generally include, but if you think that it flows better a different way, depending on your experience, or you want to say why me first of all, like Keith says, then absolutely do so. Make it individual to you, thinking about the requirements of that job and how you can effectively tell your story and highlight those relevant skills, experience and knowledge. So if we move on to AI, at the moment, I would suggest that AI just isn't good enough to create a CV or a cover letter. I often find it kind of pieces together lots of nice sounding phrases into sentences, but the overall effect has the right kind of sentence structure, but it doesn't always make sense. The language is quite bland. It isn't personalized to you because it can't. It doesn't know you like you know yourself. The other thing it doesn't do is it doesn't back up any of your claims with any evidence from your work experience, your studies, anything that you do outside of those two areas, say volunteering or hobbies. And that other element is really, really important. So you've always want to back up what you're saying to say, this is where I've developed that. I know what I'm on about almost. We're definitely seeing an increase in employers advising students against using AI in applications. So recently I've seen a couple of employers who have done it. Teacher training has now got a very, very clear page that says do not use AI, and you might be disqualified out of that application process if you use it. How I would use AI, it's a really, really useful tool, but use it for ideas and ideas only. The structure of your paragraphs and sentences, it's good for that. But all of the content and the individual language, I would look at that very, very critically, whatever it's going to say. So some of the phrases that I often see are, I wish to leverage my skills and I want to work for a dynamic and fast-paced employer. And once we start picking apart those individual elements, a lever to me is something that does this. What are we saying about our skills? It doesn't make sense. So if you're including AI sentences like that, there's a very, very good chance that that AI is going to also give that out to thousands of other students. And that isn't going to be individual to you. So there's certain common phrases that we're seeing from AI. So definitely use it as an idea bank, but definitely personalize it to you.
Thank you for that, Amy. So, of course, some of you were even going so far as to ask us to recommend specific software and platforms around AI. And given what you've said, Amy, how would you respond to that question?
Okay, so I realise that I've just said don't use AI and just use it for ideas. However, your University Careers Service will have lots of resources and help for you as a student or a graduate. So for example, at Salford, we've got something called Career Set, which uses AI to assess your cover letter and your CV to suggest improvements. Now, obviously, this is AI technology. It's all developing, but things that particular software can do really well is point out repetition. So if you've used a word quite often, it might suggest some differences. It might ask you to quantify some of the evidence that you've put in there. So instead of just saying I've increased sales, it might push you to try and say I've increased sales by 20%, for example. So the difference with this AI is that you've created your original content and you're getting AI feedback on it. And I think that's an important difference just to recognize here. So there are some AI technologies that are really, really useful. But yes, in terms of using it to create your cover letter, I would absolutely avoid it.
Okay, great. Thank you. Now, we also got questions in advance, and indeed we're getting them now, about specific types of cover letters. And one area that's of interest is when you're writing a cover letter that you're sending for a position that hasn't been advertised. So you're hoping that there's a position with that particular organisation. Can I go to you, Keith, on that one, please?
I think that it kind of flows on from what we've been saying so far, that it has to be targeted where we can. So for a speculative application for a role you don't know exists, there's nothing in particularly different in the covering letter, except, of course, there's not a specific role to apply for. So you have to show that you know a little bit about what the company does, the sorts of challenges that you might expect that would really interest you within the company. And then that's what allows you to target, so there may not be I want to be but what you can say is, I'm particularly interested in the work that you guys are doing here, here, and here. The complexity of the commercial or the technical challenges involved in those sorts of projects are exactly the sort of opportunity that I'm looking for. And then we can't go, and I'd like to apply for the job, or I was wondering if you've got any jobs, because that's really simple to go, no. Yeah, it's very black and white. Yeah. So what we want to do is grey that up where we can, to not give them an opportunity to say no. So what we might do at the beginning is go, I would appreciate advice and information on opportunities which may be available to work within your company. Because even if they come back at that stage and say, no, sorry, we don't have anything, you've also asked for advice. So we can now go back and say, oh, thanks very much. I appreciate you don't have any opportunities at the moment, but I'd still value the opportunity to discuss with you because I would really value your advice. And then they go, oh, I'm not the person to speak to. Well, could you tell me the name of the person that I should be speaking to? I was going to be in town next Thursday morning, was wondering if you could spare. Oh, Thursday wouldn't suit. Well, could you suggest a time? Because I'd be really pleased to discuss with. So all we're doing is greying up that yes, no, black, white, go away opportunity. So that's how we would target the speculative approach. It's still very targeted on the company and the understanding of what they do, but you can't ask for a specific job necessarily. But we show them that you've got a real penchant for what they do and you understand where you would fit.
Lovely, thank you. Hope that's helpful to those of you who are thinking about speculative applications and accessing what we sometimes call the hidden job market. Those jobs that never make it to being advertised, but might be the right ones for you nevertheless. Now, of course, when you work in career development, you get lots of questions about tailoring, tailoring applications, tailoring CVs and cover letters, and today's no different. So people, I think, would be interested to hear a little bit from you both about how to tailor a cover letter for multiple job applications. Does it have to be different, basically, for every organisation that we're applying for? And my favourite question, how much time should you spend on preparing your applications? Amy, over to you.
Okay, so generally, like we've been saying through all of these questions, I would go for quality over quantity. So instead of doing lots and lots of applications, you would do fewer, more tailored applications. When we think about some website where they have a quick apply button, you as a candidate, it's great for you, but for a recruiter, it's no good. It's not tailored. So they get lots of applications that no one's taken the time to respond to the job description and the requirements that you've added as that essential criteria as a recruiter. If a candidate hasn't tailored their application to include all of that, then Is that recruiter going to invite you to interview? Probably not. If you're applying for similar positions, what you'll generally find is that you're probably going to make small changes to an existing cover letter. And we know that if you want a job, you're going to be applying for quite a few of them, aren't you? So much of the content is generally pretty relevant, but you just need to double check that they're essential criteria. You're going to have made sure that you've included everything, either through that CV or through that cover letter. Always double check that just because a job has got the same job title, it doesn't mean that the actual nature of the job is going to be the same or the essential criteria is going to be the same. So just double check it. And obviously, like Keith said, you need to tailor why you want to apply for that particular role, that particular organisation. So you need to have done a bit of research on them. The question about the amount of time you should spend on applications is always very, very difficult. So I would generally say that your first application is going to take a lot more time because you haven't got those previous applications to maybe look back at, do a bit of cut and pasting. But the more you do, the quicker you'll get at it. So persevere, it will get easier. And a top tip is just to save all of those online applications. So copy and paste it into a Word document if you need to. Every CV, every cover letter that you create, because it just makes it easier for you to go back and think, oh, I mentioned that in that job application. I'll take that answer and that can be the basis of what I need to rewrite in this one that I'm currently applying for.
Brilliant. Keith, anything to add to that?
Only one thing, because again, the time's really important. We know time is very important, but if you think about it, if you were making 20 or 30 really tailored applications, it's going to take you longer than making 200, send them away really quickly. So it's not going to save you time. It's still going to take an awful lot of time, but I genuinely believe you get a much better return on investment in that time if you're tailoring those applications. It's like throwing arrows at a target, isn't it? You throw 200 all at the one go. You're never going to hit anywhere near where you're trying to aim at. Take them one at a time, aim them very carefully, and you can throw fewer.
Okay, lovely. Right, well, now it gets really fun because we've shared our answers from the questions that we prepared, but now I'm going to have a go at picking some questions out of the Q&A that people have been posting whilst we've been talking. So bear with me whilst I try to do that. We've had a couple of questions of things that people might have missed, we said early on. So one about length of cover letter. And one about when you're sending a CV via email, are you putting it in the body of the email or is it a second attachment? Keith, I think you covered those things. Do you want to just remind us what you said?
I think the email, the email versus the letter and the second attachment. I'm not sure there's a right answer for that. If I'm being honest, sometimes I'd be a little bit anal about that. So quite often in the original email, I might write very similar to what I would do as the covering letter. But maybe I sometimes put a sentence in that says, I have attached this letter as a more formal covering letter alongside my CV, and I attached the letter alongside the CV, so it becomes a 3-page document that they get. So if they want to print it off, they print off a nice letter rather than an email. But I think as long as the messages are right, I'm not sure there's a right answer for that.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And a lot of this is about tailoring to your unique circumstances,
Absolutely.
isn't it? Yeah. Okay. We've had a question about any major differences between cover letters in the UK or in continental Europe or in the US. I don't know if either of you feel that you've got a perspective to offer on that.
Good question. I would probably look at some resources that are specific to that country, wherever you're thinking of applying for. But I would generally expect it's not going to be wildly different because the structure that Keith suggested, that's very much focused on why that organisation, why you, why that role. So that should apply in any country. I don't know if you agree, Keith.
Yep, that's the way I would do it too. I don't think the letter is going to change. Obviously, there'll be variations in requirements for CVs, for instance. You know that in some places they'll have a photograph and whatever, but the structure of the CV. So yeah, do your due diligence. Do have a think about the company, but I would suggest that the letters are not going to be very much different.
Okay. Oh, a question just come in that says, do you avoid dear sir or madam for UK jobs, or is that a US thing? So I don't know that I've not heard of a particular US rationale for avoiding dear sir or madam, but what are your thoughts on using that sort of language versus trying to find a name, or using a less binary approach perhaps?
I think for me, I think I think you've hit the nail on the head, Jill. I think that non-binary approach doesn't always fit in with that suggested language. So you might want to change it to hiring manager, or ideally you would try and find the name of the person, but that's not always possible. But yeah, I do wonder in the next few years if we might start seeing that sir and madam is quite outdated, and it might be more of a hiring manager, which is less specific.
Yeah, that's and it seems like some people are agreeing with that within the chat and the Q&A. Now, I mean, there's so many really interesting questions, and many of them are sort of straying off the technicalities of the cover letter, and they're thinking that they're more kind of general about applications, and that whole business of the interplay between the candidate and the organisation. So let's see how we get on. Bear with me whilst I'm trying to filter these, but Kimona, for example, has asked, when you've got person specifications for a job, do you address in your application or wherever it might be only the essential criteria, or do we cover the desirable ones as well? Keith, you're smiling, so I think that means you have an answer.
Well, I would try and go for the whole lot, to be honest. I think if you really think about it, we're not going to be able to cover off everything that an employer is going to ask for. I'd be very surprised if we could, if we could provide everything that they're looking for. But if you think about it from the employer perspective, when they're advertising the essential and desirable requirements, they're always going to ask for a 10 out of 10 applicant. They're going to ask for the sun and the moon and the stars, aren't they? But they might be quite happy with a 7 out of 10. So what we do is we try and match as fully as we possibly can everything that we can. So I think it's really a case of trying to cover off everything that you possibly can, in the knowledge that there may be a little bit that you can't do. So I think aim for getting at least more than half of them sorted if you possibly can. But I think just you want to try and cover them off as much as possible.
Okay, great. Some a couple of really nice specific ones. Oliver would like to know whether employers prefer a document saved as a PDF or Word for a cover letter, and indeed also for CVs. You any thoughts about that?
So I would usually say have a look at what they ask for. Sometimes they might say they might tell you what kind of document they want. I would sometimes suggest a PDF if it hasn't been, suggested otherwise, that you can use a PDF just in case any formatting changes sometimes occur. More so on CVs, if you've done some formatting. I think generally a cover letter is less formatted than a CV, but we sometimes find that in Word, for example, if someone's viewing it on a Mac or something, it can change, whereas a PDF, it absolutely doesn't.
Okay, brilliant. Yes, and that would certainly chime with my experience. Shanika has asked Amy if you can just restate how to start and how to end the cover letter. The nuts and bolts. Do we put the date, name, position? Is it best regards? How do we sign off? That could you go through some of that, please?
So a traditional cover letter that you will often see online you've probably seen like a formal letter. So your address in the top right, their address underneath to the left, and then you would have the date on the right hand side. I think I'm thinking this through with my hands. And then you would have dear, whoever that person would be. Ideally, you would find their name, like we've said. You would have the body of your cover letter, and then you would sign off with yours sincerely if you know their name, or if you don't know their name, you're using hiring manager, for example, you would sign off yours faithfully. There's loads of advice online for that. Again, I would probably recommend any resources that your university careers service has, Prospects, maybe Unitemps has got some resources on this as well, where you can see that. But it's obviously very dependent on how you are applying. That's a very old cover letter is what I would probably suggest. So like we've said, there might be different formats of that. You could do Keith's approach, where you add your cover letter to the document that you're going to share, and then you might put some text in saying, I've done a more formal version of that. So it really depends on the individual circumstance. And if you want some specific advice, I would definitely recommend going to your university careers team. Every university has one. If you're a current student, then you will have access. A lot of university careers services will see graduates as well. Some of them for life, some of them for 2 or 3 years after they graduate. So go and check and speak to them.
Yes, and lots of the questions that are coming in are really quite specific to people's individual circumstances, and that's, you know, a situation where you can have a bit of a dialogue, which will really help people to tailor their support to your particular situation. Okay, we'll take a couple more. Irani's really getting into the speculative applications. She's saying, do you have any advice on follow-up? So if a firm says, please get back to us in a few months, do you send the same cover letter, or how do you handle that? How much detail do you add? Keith?
Oh, I would definitely go back. That's the first thing. That's the way business is done. You know, if you're actually working for a company and you went to your contractor, or you're looking for a new contract, and they say, oh, sorry, we don't have anything today, does that mean you never go back to the company again? Well, of course you do. You go back and you ask next week, and the week after, and the week after. Now, in terms of your applications, you don't want to be going every week. But you almost want to be a little bit of a pest. You want to stop short of becoming a pest, but not very much short of it. So if they do say come back in a couple of months, then absolutely, you know, go back in 3-4 weeks if you haven't heard anything. Drop them a line if they've said come back in a few months. Now, what you might find is that a lot of the letter will be similar, but obviously the introduction to that letter would have to be different. You know, so what you would be doing is going, oh, thank you very much for getting back to me. You know, I'd sent my application a month ago. You suggested I get back. I'm still really interested in what you're doing. You know, so it's that kind of vibe then that we start. And then we can go, oh, by the way, I'm still really good, and these are why I'm interested, and this is what I've got to offer. But you're really doing it. You're thanking them for the offer of coming back to them. You're showing them you've still got an interest. That resilience, that tenacity, that not taking no for an answer, and I'll be back because I'm really interested in what you guys are doing. That can be really, really positive. The number of times that companies have pulled someone's letter out of a pile that they've had because someone has come back for a second time to say, look, remember me? I contacted you a little while ago. I'm still here and I'm still really interested. They go, oh, now let's get that out of the pile, because I'll only look at the ones that have come back to me for a second time. You know, so absolutely get back in touch. But I don't think your letter changes very much, apart from the acknowledging that you've been back in touch with them, and you're really pleased and you're still really keen.
So that answers some of the questions. I think we've had a couple of questions about getting character and what's unique to you across in a cover letter. Yeah, I mean, it stands to reason, doesn't it, that if there are 10 qualified candidates with the skills to do the job, then the one you're going to want is the one who wants to do it the most, who's got that motivation. Now, we have had a question about the disclosure of disabilities, and another question about when and how to disclose if you're looking for particular hours of work or flexibility, which might also fall into a similar kind of equality and diversity umbrella, if you like. So I know that's really complex area in which you probably want to give tailored advice, but I wondered, Amy and Keith, if there's anything that you'd want to say to the people who've asked those questions.
Shall I start us off, Keith? I would generally say try and approach the recruiter direct. So sometimes they will say if you want an informal discussion about the role, or you could just contact the company direct and maybe ask those conversations over the phone. I wouldn't necessarily say that the right point as a general rule, and obviously, like you say, Jill, you know, this needs to be a bit more digging into your specific situation and the type of role that you're applying for. But I wouldn't necessarily say that when you send your CV and cover letter, that would be the point where you would disclose. It might be a separate email, it might be a separate conversation. You might disclose at the next stage, for example. But again, yeah, I would definitely have a conversation with someone.
Keith, anything to add?
Yeah, I would agree with that wholeheartedly. The thing about disclosing disability as well is you can choose to do that at any time of the application process. And quite often I like to couch it rather than disclosing a disability. Quite often it's about suggesting adjustments that would help your application. So it's not about what you can't do, it's about the adjustments that you believe that would offer a level playing field for you, if that makes sense. So I don't think there, I know if you choose to put that on a CV or whatever, then I don't think there's any issues with that. You don't need to worry about that in the slightest. But I think you can choose at the relevant time for you at each stage. You know, so I've been now invited for interview. Then you would get back to the company and say, these are the adjustments that I would like in order for me to perform at my best, rather than saying, oh, I need to disclose a disability. If that makes sense, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's
a framing
the way I would,
thing, isn't it?
absolutely, yeah. And it's about framing.
Yeah.
And everybody's situation is going to be slightly different, and that's why I think it's really, really important to come and discuss those kind of things on an individual basis with your careers team.
Great. Okay, so we're getting towards the end of our time together, but I am going to ask you just if there's any particular do's and don'ts that you would want to emphasise as sort of a final comment for today. Amy, what about you?
So I know that Keith has got a lot of do's, so I'm going to do it a little bit unorthodox, and I'm going to focus on the don'ts. So don't talk generally about your experience. Make it very, very specific to that particular role, and that applies to your skills, your experience, your knowledge. Don't tell the company about themselves. So tell them what you know about them, what attracts you to them, not necessarily, I know you're a top company globally. You know, they know that already. And as you probably will already understand from what we said earlier, don't get AI to write your cover letter for you. Use it as a tool to get ideas, but be really critical of what it creates. That would be my 3 don'ts.
Thank you, Amy. And Keith, over to you with your do's.
Oh, it's just the converse, really, isn't it? It's make sure you're focused on the motivation for the role. You know, you got to make sure that they see that this is an organization that you would get out of your bed every morning to go and work for. You know, that it inspires me to get up in the morning, and this is why has to be targeted. A vague letter won't work. I've actually, and I made a few notes, and I'd mentioned throwing arrows at a target before, but do your applications one at a time and aim them very, very, very carefully, and do try to link it to the CV all the time. You know, as you'll see from my CV, I've developed a strong background in. As you'll see, I have a range of project work where I've developed these technical skills already, or whatever. So we need to show that there's a link, and your CV and letter then come as a package. The one thing that just jumped out was just what Amy had said, don't tell the company about themselves. In letters, students do go, I'd like to work for your company because, and I'm not quite sure that's always specific. We really need a proper why. So, you know, your company's the biggest company in the world, so I want to work for you. and then I come along and say, your company's the biggest company in the world, so I don't want to work for you because you're far too big. So the piece of fact hasn't changed. It's still the biggest company in the world, but it attracts the one person and it doesn't attract the other. So the piece of fact is not the important bit. It's why does that piece of fact make it an attractive company for you? And it's that bit that we need to always get to. So do think about why what you know about the company makes it a company that you would get out of your bed to work for in the morning.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, I've really enjoyed chairing today. And as well as hearing from Amy and Keith, it's been great to see what questions are coming in. And also, I haven't really followed the chat because I've been focusing on the Q&A, but my sense is that you've been helping each other as well. And as an audience, you've been sharing your own experiences and perspectives. So that's great. That's really heartwarming to see. Just to mention, as I wrap up, that a recording of this webinar will be available on the Unitemps website. So everyone who's signed up for it will be emailed a link. And we've also been sharing the recording of the previous webinar today as well. I think there's been some links shared to the Unitemps website where there are loads of career resources, and we've also mentioned University Career Services. If you've got access to those as a student or graduate, we strongly recommend them. Please do follow Unitemps on social media. We're active on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, X, I should say. And then you'll find out about future activities that we're doing to support people with their applications. My final words are to thank everybody for being here today, for your participation, for your questions in advance and today, to thank colleagues at Unitemps for enabling and promoting this event, and Amy and Keith, of course, for sharing their wisdom and expertise with us. So thanks everybody, and wishing you all the best for the rest of your day and your cover letters in the future.
Thank you, Jill, for chairing. Best of luck, everyone.